Okay, kind of gonna get a teeny bit sidetracked here and watch this BadEmpanada video that's railing against Hassan. I was kind of curious. I haven't seen it, so I was kind of curious. I don't know how long it
So I'm
is.
sadly very aware
42 minutes. We're not gonna watch this whole thing. I just want to watch a little bit.
of the fact that
But
most
like, just so that we all have context here, maybe my opinion will change. We'll see. Personally, I think it's a good thing to have some back and forth criticism between leftists. I think you can only really improve your positions if you're willing to have back and forths. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think also in general, having people who support Hassan who are critical of him is good for Hassan because it makes those positions more valid, right? It means that they don't believe those things because they happen to like Hassan. They believe those things because they believe those things and they happen to agree with Hassan on those things. So I don't necessarily think that it's like objectively a bad thing. I think it's pretty healthy and I think it's good for discourse. As long as the criticism is like fair, like it's not necessarily bad faith and it's just, no, this is what I believe is better for the left or for these causes. And your belief in that is genuine. I think I think the discourse is good. That's my opinion. Again, we'll watch a little bit of it and see. And I'm sure, I mean, like, it's BadEmpanada, so I'm sure he makes a couple good points and then he's going to say a bunch of things that I'm going to disagree with, but that's fine. Like,
of you do not come to the conclusion.
My frustration is more with people who are very dishonest, like Ethan Klein. Ethan Klein knows, and he put a bunch of stuff in that content nuke. I mean, the entire content nuke was only things that have already been talked about. We've seen all of those clips already. And a lot of those clips that he included, if you had any understanding of any of these situations, you would recognize that Ethan Klein has no leg to stand on. But he put them in anyways, like, because it's bad faith. He doesn't care that any of these specific video clips are deceptive or that you can actually defend them by actually watching the rest of the clip. He doesn't care. He wants to be dishonest. As long as it's not dishonest framing, I think discourse is good.
That you hold about things based on anything more than who's saying it. And people are going to just agree with Hassan Piker because they like him and they have fallen for the aura that he espouses of him being some sort of like unique special radical who's doing something extremely awesome and important. So you're just going to have a predetermined conclusion coming in here that I must defend Hassan Piker no matter what. And you will not be receptive to anything that does not include like a disclaimer at the end of every sentence talking about how awesome Hassan Piker is. But that's not going to happen here. You aren't going to be coddled like a child. So I suggest you just leave now. Either way, Hassan Piker spreads the ideology of Jewish exceptionalism constantly. He leads people away from correctly assessing what needs to be done regarding Israel-Palestine and ultimately serves to uphold liberal Zionism in doing so, helping to ensure that the problems continue and that if some sort of solution ever actually materializes, it will be one that abides by Zionist terms. Now, I've already covered this in a ton of depth before in this video on my main channel, Jewish Exceptionalism, Liberal Zionism, Jewish Supremacy, how you inadvertently support Israel. In this video, I use Owen Jones as the primary example of this, but make no mistake, this could have been Hassan Piker quite easily. Now, it would have been a bit harder to use Hassan as an example because he's never said anything quite as obviously stupid and as obviously supportive of Zionism as Owen Jones has. But make no mistake, he still upholds this same Jewish exceptionalist ideology that, as I show in this video, helps to uphold liberal Zionism and thus Jewish supremacy in Israel. So you should just go
I mean, if the argument is like similar to how refusing to reflect on your privilege as someone who's like white, cis, straight, wealthy in America, you are participating in a system that helps disadvantage.
Watch this video. You should go and watch.
It helps disadvantage minorities. I mean, I think I would agree with that framework if that's the framework you're using, right? And is this because Hassan supports a one-state solution? I mean, I don't know. I would have to keep watching and see what his arguments are. I don't think he's arguing that Hassan is a Zionist. I think he's saying that Hassan is inadvertently pushing these concepts without either knowing or caring, right? Not that he's a Zionist. I think this video would have a very different tone if he thought Hassan was a Zionist. Okay. No.
This video. If you actually give a shit about anything here, you pause right now and you just go, or you just close this video. Honestly, who gives a shit about Hassan Piker? And you go and watch this video because you'll be able to correctly identify the sort of stuff that I'm going to be talking about here in what Hassan Piker does yourself without needing me to point it out to you if you just watch this video. I am going to play the relevant parts of this video right here, and then I'm going to explain precisely how Hassan Piker does precisely what I was talking about here. It's going to be fairly long, but it's very important, because if I don't play this, I would just end up explaining this to you here in a much less structured way than the way that this video explains it. Because the alternative is that I would...
His argument is basically just Hassan doesn't go far enough, which I get his point, but also he probably won't have much of a platform if he did. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't even think he would disagree with me. I think he'd wear it as a badge of honor. But like, BadEmpanada is definitely, if Hassan is considered an extremist in mainstream politics relative to the majority of like politicians or pundits, if he would be considered an extremist, BadEmpanada is like a giga extremist. But that being an extremist doesn't make it your position's bad. It's just a descriptive term, right? In the same way that you can talk about something having consequences, it doesn't mean that the consequences are bad or good. It just is true. And a lot of times extreme positions are good. Like, I mean, it's an extreme position to say, I think everyone in America should have healthcare. That doesn't make it a bad position, right? Having radical ideas doesn't make those ideas bad.
Give you the cliff notes of this just off the top of my head, rather than showing you it in a more structured way when I've already done the latter before in this video. And I'd rather do it correctly than potentially make some sort of mistake or leave something out. So here we go. Watch all 17 minutes of this right here with me. There is a pervasive ideology in Western countries that is core to enabling their support of Israel. You've likely felt it, though perhaps without actually consciously perceiving it. This ideology is the bedrock through which anything resembling actually effective action against the crucial Western backing for the state of Israel is nipped in the bud, long before it can even really
Same shirt, stop. Stop. If Hassan did what Empanada does, less people would get his points, and therefore he'd have less of a political impact. Sure, I mean, I feel like there are a lot of good strategies, and it's very rare for a strategy to be bad, but most strategies are just different. I think it depends on, like, what you're advocating for. As long as what you're advocating for is based, like, as long as the means are based and what the ends are based, then you're good, right?
Get close to getting anywhere. It enforces a narrow spectrum of acceptable anti-Israel discourse, excluding from the majority of the public sphere anything that runs counter to Israel's underlying Jewish supremacist ideological framework, known as Zionism. And it's so successful in this role that it even often leads genuinely well-meaning people who want to be pro-Palestinian into upholding what are ultimately Zionist positions. It also even leads them into attacking others who do hold anti-Zionist positions with smears of anti-Semitism, creating a cycle where large parts of the pro-Palestinian movement spend time and effort on obediently policing themselves into complete impotency. This ideology is not often noticed, let alone actually talked about, so it doesn't have a commonly used name. So allow me to coin one. Jewish exceptionalism. This term can be understood literally. It's the idea that Israel and its underpinning Zionist ideology are uniquely justified because they are conceived of as being Jewish. Jews are considered by this Jewish exceptionalist framework to be a special group of people, one that is practically innately oppressed. And this supposed innate oppression is used to spread the notion that Israel, as the self-described Jewish state, needs to be given a special exception from standards otherwise widely accepted as normal. This has become something of a taken for granted, common sense notion in many Western countries, basically like the sun rising in the morning. And once you really start perceiving it and thinking about it, you see it everywhere. This video is going to be dissecting this idea of Jewish exceptionalism, explaining how it manifests, how it functions, and why, going over a number of different examples to do so. So let's begin here with some general examples of what we're talking about to help you get a grasp on it.
Oh, so yeah, BadEmpanada lives in the global south, places that suffer from American imperialism, so he is much more critical of American politics and political commentators. Yeah. I want to let him finish his point. I don't want to yap before he completes his point and like reconnects it to Hassan.
Usually, a country founded in living memory on the mass expulsion and killing of most of the prior population would be considered quite illegitimate, and the victims of this barbarity widely supported in their pursuit of justice and restitution. Yet in the West, Israel's founding is instead often framed as an act of self-determination, of liberation, and even of justice. Reality is reversed, with the victims of this framed as evil and anti-Semitic themselves for daring to continue to lay claim to what's been taken from them, simply because their victimizers happen to be Jewish. The idea that any other country should specifically be run for the benefit of one single racial or ethnic group, what is known as an ethno-state, would normally cause revulsion among many. But for Israel, this is framed entirely differently, as both justified and a necessity, something that is usually just totally unquestioned. And you'd expect that decades of brutal occupation of millions of people, which is so clear as day and obvious that even Israel's own allies have been forced to admit that it's an occupier, at least in part, would usually be talked about bluntly, matter-of-factly, succinctly, without mincing words. And it would be normal to frame those who fight against this as being in the right. And yet those who fight back against Israel are actually instead denounced in the West, regardless of the actual circumstances. And even mild acknowledgement of what Israel does to its victims is commonly prefaced with a flurry of ritualistically repeated phrases, like denouncing anti-Semitism, affirming that the Israeli occupier state has a right to exist and a right to defend itself, and outright denouncing those who resist it. There's also more subtle ways in which this Jewish exceptionalism manifests. For example, the way the pro-Palestinian movement itself often feels obliged to seek approval from Jewish people and tends to put its Jewish members on a pedestal, going to pains to cater to them. This is a practice that would make absolutely no sense outside of the framework of Jewish exceptionalism, since it's otherwise completely nonsensical to seek approval and validation to denounce an ethno-state from people who happen to be from the dominant ethnic group of said ethno-state. Similarly, arguments are often had about what percentage of Jewish people worldwide are Zionists and support Israel, as if to say that whether Zionism and Israel are acceptable or not depends on what people who are of the group that Zionism exists to benefit think of it. It's only due to Jewish exceptionalism that arguments like this can seem reasonable rather than insane, as the reality is that even if every single Jewish person was a Zionist, it would still be a fundamentally abhorrent ideology. Once you remove that element, the argument makes about as much sense as going back to Germany in 1940 and
I mean, the general point, I might skip this section, but the general point that he's saying is it doesn't matter if your intentions are good, if you're pushing any type of defense for the state of Israel, the apartheid state of Israel, you are contributing harm, essentially, right? So, like, think about the people that say Israel has a right to defend itself. Those people are pushing a false notion that Israel is on the defense by making that claim, when in reality, Israel has always been the aggressor. You are legitimizing their, quote, defense, which is just an offense, as being legitimate or valid by even agreeing or endorsing or participating for even a second with that, right? And I mean, like, obviously I agree with those notions. I mean, you have to be an idiot to not. I am kind of curious, and I already agree with the basis of this, that, like, you have to be careful, even if you are trying to be more impartial. You have to be careful to not accidentally basically push pro-Israel, pro-apartheid talking points. That you can't give defenses all the time and you can't concede all of these points all the time, because it's not a great long-term strategy, right? I'm curious about, like, what he thinks specifically Hassan is engaging in.
They are not allies. They fundamentally want them just because they're Jewish, and that is completely incorrect. But, you know, you need to...
Hassan speaks about the utmost importance of recognizing the humanity of the people who have been indoctrinated into hateful ideologies while watching the documentary Israelism, how young American Jews' views on Israel are shifting. I mean, I watched it... man, this is so tough, because I have, like, a very strong empathy-based politics. Like, that's... My opinion is anyone can talk about politics as long as you have empathy, as long as you are capable of giving empathy to every single person, which is why I hold the same opinions here, that, like, I do hold empathy for Israelis that have been brainwashed by their government into thinking that they're under attack by all these neighboring Arabs that hate them just for being Jewish. Like, I feel bad when I think about those people, because they have no idea that they're just being lied to by their government. In the same way that I feel bad for, like, anti-vaxxers who didn't get the COVID vaccine, who fucking died. Like, or even the ones who didn't. Like, you fell for propaganda. I have nothing but hate and contempt for the people who push these false narratives, that push this disinfo, like the Tucker Carlsons of the world, who are vaccinated, who talk about, I don't know if the vaccine's safe. Like, you will burn in hell. Like, you are scum of the earth, Tucker Carlson. You will burn in hell for the crimes against humanity that you've committed. Like, you are a total piece of shit to knowingly push lies that get people killed. You falling for it, like I do have empathy for those people.
Think about what Jewish people think, because they are special. They have a special experience. After all, they're Jewish. To frame the Jews as somehow victims of propaganda when it comes to Israel is a total crock of shit. You can't be a victim of something that benefits you. And I have another video about this on my main channel called The Truth About Israel.
I mean,
It's not
no, not necessarily. I mean, this is like talked about a lot in feminist literature about like patriarchal ideals, right? Just because you are benefited by the patriarchy doesn't mean that it can't also make your life worse, right? It's like kind of a major point about feminism, right? That the Andrew Tates of the world that are convincing you that all of your issues are being caused by women being in the workplace, those people are making your life worse. You're benefiting, for sure. You benefit from that, but those people are making your life worse. Buying into these narratives makes your life worse. People who are fed propaganda from birth are victims. It's like child soldiers. I mean, because I get the point that BadEmpanada is making, which is like you're an adult. At some point, you have to own up to your actions, which I agree with. But like also, there's a lot of people that fall for really easy propaganda. I'm Jewish, so to be taken with a grain of salt. I get the point of frustration putting pro-Palestinian Jewish voices on a pedestal because the Palestinian struggle with death and destruction is objectively worse than the Jewish struggle of falling for propaganda. But I'm very with Hassan that we live in a reality, and if we want to end war and suffering, you have to gradually de-radicalize people. Pro-Palestinian Jews need to bring their communities around. Yeah. I mean, it's like this has been rehashed plenty of times on like, again, the concept of feminism, like feminist literature, that like you can be totally right as a woman to hate men, especially if you've had enough bad experiences and it is clearly ingrained in our culture, like rape culture, for example. It is very ingrained in our culture. Like, it's not a matter of like bad apples. It's a matter of this culture is misogynistic. And a lot of women, I think, would be right in their hatred of men currently as they exist in our society. But if you even suggest that that's okay, people get really pissed and they're like, no, you have to give understanding to these people. And it's like I feel for both positions. I do. Right? Because I think, you'll attract bees with honey than vinegar, whatever the fucking saying is. You'll attract more people with an empathetic perspective, and I think it is the right way to go. But I also understand that when talking about an apartheid, I get the position of like, no, you should cede no ground ever. This is my favorite type of moron. I love a bigot that doesn't even know how to do bigotry correctly. Anti-Semitism with cleavage. That's new. You probably believe trans men should play in a women's sport. Trans men, you're so dumb. You are so dumb, dude. You are so dumb. Please, just... Oh my God. I can't. I'd have... Shapes and colors, boys. Shapes and colors. That's all.
Netanyahu explaining specifically how Israelis support Israel, not because they're propagandized victims, but because it's good for them. They know that it hurts Palestinians, and ultimately they are either okay with that or they outright support it, because what they care about is that it benefits them. And it's incredibly disappointing, not just that Hassan Piker says this, but that his fans use this as an example of him supposedly saying something that's right and ultimately abiding by the Jewish exceptionalist framework of his opponents and thus helping to uphold liberal Zionism. Because make no mistake, what this documentary that he's referring to here, Israelism, is basically about is hardcore radical Zionists finding out that Israel does bad things in the West Bank and becoming liberal Zionists instead. And it is sadly not at all surprising to me that Hassan uses this as an example of how Zionist Jews are supposedly victims of propaganda. Again, You can't be a victim of something that you want to believe in because deep down you understand that believing in it derives great material benefits for you. Now, for some more context, I directly called out Hassan for this on my YouTube community page, where I said, I will fucking puke if I see Hassan Piker say, I invite Israelis onto my broadcasts all the time, or tell us how we need to emphasize and humanize Israelis who are victims of propaganda themselves again. Jewish exceptionist, liberal Zionist drivel. Validating the idea that we need approval from tokens among the enemy to oppose them just because they're Jewish, and painting
I mean,
Zionists as being misled.
Chad. It's not like it's not purity testing. It's that he has a fundamental belief that if you are too lax with where you draw the line, your cause will suffer, right? So take feminism, for example. How sexist are men allowed to be? Where do you draw that line in order to rehabilitate them? Right? There is a line, and the farther you give ground, the harder it is to protect the people that you're supposed to be protecting. That's what he's saying about Palestine. That's what he's saying about Israel. He's saying his major criticism is you're giving too much credit to Israelis, not Jewish people, to Israelis, despite the fact that they benefit heavily from this system. And when you make these excuses, it makes it a lot harder to rally against settlements. It makes it a lot harder to rally against the IDF. It makes it a lot harder to rally against Israel existing as an apartheid state. It makes these things harder to attack because you've given so much ground. That's the point that he's making. And like,
I guess.
I get his perspective, and I don't necessarily think he's wrong. I just don't think it's effective. I just don't think it's, I think more people are put off by it than not. I mean, this is my opinion, right? The same can be said about American citizens then. By his logic, every U.S. citizen should be going to the trials. I mean, yeah, I think he actually believes that. He's mad at Hassan for playing the role of white guy explaining BLM marches to other white guys. I don't know that that's what he's accusing him of. I think he's accusing him of giving up too much ground to apartheid state Israel and its citizens.
Victims rather than the reality where they're enthusiastically and willingly pursuing their own interests for material gain at the cost of Palestinians. Sickening. And Hassan left a comment responding to this, which I'm not going to beat around the bush, it's word salad. This is the sort of thing that if you had like a mildly pro-Palestinian PR manager, they would tell you to post exactly this. It's utterly meaningless word salad. Let me read it. The struggle is multifaceted. Internal pressure plays a role. I will not back away from contextualizing the role militant resistance plays in emancipation, but I also won't immediately discard those who have agreements with me on that, especially when I have relied on their investigative reporting. I've used Yuval's work at 972 magazine in the past. It's important not to take honest reporting.
Yeah, to be clear, I think you actually put it in words. Because, chat, you're not going to be able to, like, take down BadEmpanada's arguments unless you understand the argument that he's making. Because I think you can easily disagree with BadEmpanada. I mean, I've disagreed with him about at least one thing. Well, I can talk about it in a little bit, but maybe in that analogy, Hassan would be giving a voice to one of the good Apple cops. I think that's what he's trying to show, if that makes sense. So, like, let's talk about something really quickly before anyone says, like, this is not a good analogy. Let me further the idea that I think this actually is a good analogy. There are cops that join police force academies or whatever in an attempt, and at some point they attempt to make the system better. Now, they usually get fired or they suicide with 2 bullets to the back of the head, but there are cops that do this, that they have tried to give they've tried to make the police force better from the inside. Obviously, they fail because it's an unbelievably corrupt system. It's the only good union in this country, which is very sad and pathetic. But when you bring on these people and you talk about, like, you bring on a cop that got fired or whatever, and you're like, yeah, you were really trying. Yeah. You can see how, to someone who hates cops, it's like, dude, you are making cops look good right now. You're playing defense and you're doing propaganda. That's the point that BadEmpanada is making, right? That's what he's saying. He's saying when you bring on the Israelis that are fighting against the occupation, you are like overrepresenting the amount of Israelis that even give a fuck about this occupation. And you're conceding too much ground to Israel. You're going to struggle to push back against Israel's apartheid state unless you're willing to take a harsher stance than I mean, I disagree with BadEmpanada. I think it's worse. I think it's a worse strategy. But I get I get the point that he's making.
The bodies that Israeli Jewish allies put forth to protect Palestinians for granted, even if we have disagreements. Okay, first things first. What bodies are Israeli Jewish allies putting forward to protect Palestinians? There's like 2 of them. And the Yuval guy in question is not one of them, to be clear. We'll get to that in a minute. You've used Yuval's work at 972 in the past. So let me bring you up to speed with some context. 972 magazine is an overtly liberal Zionist newspaper in Israel, which got famous by saying things that Palestinians were saying like a year later. I cited it myself.
Also, just to be clear, to explain one other thing as well. I'm so invested, chat. I'm so invested in this topic. To preface, I don't at all believe the quote, I'm a victim of propaganda. I do think that being a victim of being duped is stupid and I don't deserve remorse, but giving no quarter to Jewish voices that support Palestinians and want to end the suffering sort of plays into the hand of Israelis and American Jewish propaganda that Palestinians want no peace and falsehood, that they want the destruction of the Jewish people in the process of breaking down Zionism. I mean, again, I also agree that I think this strategy is more effective. I think the strategy that is empathy-based is more effective. I think showing people, hey, it's not just Americans or Palestinians or Arab people that support this cause. I mean, even people who are born into the brainwashing of the IDF in Israel, even those people, some of those people can see the light and realize that their fucking country sucks. And it absolutely is an apartheid state. I think showing that is an effective strategy because I think it gives you more ground to stand on. So, I mean, I disagree on principle with BadEmpanada on this one. Oh, I was going to say something and I lost it.
As well in the past, but I've also cited the fucking New York Times.
Sorry, I remember what I was going to say. I think the problem is the stance that, let's just say for a second, let's just endorse the idea or consider the idea that BadEmpanada's strategy is more effective, that ceding no ground ever on an apartheid state, on a genocide, is the way to do it. You cannot cede any ground. You have to be as harsh as possible. I think the problem with that is I don't think building a utopia with those harsh ideals is a good strategy. I think that ideal is only worthwhile if we got there with this is going to sound weird, but empathy-based resistance.
The Washington Post. Citing something does not mean that you need to praise the person who is writing it, that you need to uphold them as allies or whatever, because this Yuval Abraham guy, he's not an ally at all. And the first part is basically just complete liberal word salad. He says, I won't immediately discard those who have disagreements with me on that. You don't need to appeal to them as people. You don't need to befriend them as people. Not treating them as special beings who have something special to say just because they're Israeli and Jewish is not the same thing as citing some article that they contributed to. What 972 magazine has done is basically the same as what Haaretz does. A year or two after Palestinians have been saying, this is happening to us, they will come out with some sort of supposed expose where an unnamed IDF source tells them the same thing that Palestinians have been saying has been happening for years with video proof and stuff. And they will be this unnamed IDF source told us this, and they will present that as if now that a Jewish guy has said so, it's validated. Now, this can be worth citing as additional evidence on top of everything else, but it doesn't warrant like specific praise in the framing of the people writing it as allies, because they are not.
Again, the point that he's making is like, okay, let's say you are a slave owner in America 200, 300 years ago. You don't deserve special praise because you as a slave owner realize that your slaves are human beings and they shouldn't be enslaved. You don't get special like rewards for that, for finally realizing that, hey, the system that's benefiting you is actually cruel. That's the argument that he's making, that you shouldn't get special praise because you grew up in this system that benefited you and then realized, wait, my country is bad. I understand his position. I disagree. I think that it's the sad reality that you have to give special praise. Sorry, special praise in this context, chat. I see some people questioning this. Special praise in this context is just referring to, wow, you were able to overcome the brainwashing that your country attempted to put in you. That's what that is. That's what special praise in this context means. Is that not praiseworthy? I mean, I think people that agree with BadEmpanada would say that it's not praiseworthy. That if you don't find yourself in that position, you're just like a selfish person. That it's a bare minimum, right? That like, for example, people against women voting, right? I think it's the unfortunate reality that you have to uplift the voices of like the men supporting women voting. That women should be able to say that, and everyone should be sane enough to be like, yeah, that makes sense, but that's not the case. So we have to prop up particular figures that would be more effective. And that's what I'm arguing here. Like, you will have more success putting anti-Zionist Israelis in not all of the forefront. They can't be exclusively in the forefront. There should be Palestinian voices there as well, but they should also have a seat at that table because they will attract more supporters than if they weren't given a seat at the table. And we're talking about concepts here. I'm not actually talking about Yuval specifically. I'm just trying to explain what I believe BadEmpanada's position is and explain why I understand and agree and also disagree.
Not allies. They fundamentally want different things to what you yourself say that you want. You know, these are like liberal two-status. These are people who will say Netanyahu's going too far in Gaza, as I said in the Jewish exceptionalism video that we went over a second ago, or the West Bank settlements are bad, but fundamentally they're still Zionists. And while they may sometimes produce work that is useful to cite, that does not make them an ally. Certainly not any more than it makes a New York Times reporter my ally when they like begrudgingly report that, say, the USA interfered in Venezuela or something. So the context on this Yuval Abraham thing is that Yuval Abraham is this Israeli liberal Zionist filmmaker, or calling him a filmmaker is very generous. The only reason that he can be called a filmmaker is because he's leached off Palestinians, and that is a fact. And Hassan Piker, when he interviewed the creators of Noahland, he made a point to specifically point out how awesome and valuable Yuval Abraham is specifically for being an Israeli. And of course, this Hassan Piker cult subreddit made sure to specifically point that out in response to Ethan Klein's idiocy, saying, but Hassan Piker didn't even acknowledge the contribution of the Israeli to this. Is to point to Hassan specifically acknowledging the epic contribution of the Israeli to this, as if that makes, you know, the fact that he's an Israeli collaborating on this makes him special. It's the complete wrong way to respond. Again, the way to respond to that is, who fucking cares? We don't need the approval of some Israeli to post evidence of Palestinian oppression. Give me a fucking break. So here's specifically the part that was the worst, but I mean, the whole thing is pretty bad.
About that, actually, because so Yuval Abraham played a role in this, in the making of this documentary. I've actually really admired his work for a long time at 972 Magazine. Local Calls, another one that does a lot of investigative reporting on all of the horrible things that the Israeli military is doing.
So, you know, singling out like the contribution of this sort of Israeli guy who is only here, because without an Israeli, a token Israeli there, a lot of people will not feel comfortable even acknowledging the existence of a movie like this. That's the entire reason he's here. That's what his role is. You know, there's like this ridiculous question that Hassan posed in this interview as well, for example, where he makes sure to point out the importance of the Israeli allies as if they need to be singled out for specific praise just because they are Israelis, like the two of them who exist.
But that's not, that's inaccurate. And maybe he doesn't realize it. They're being singled out because of the fact that they won an Oscar, right? They won. Yeah, they won. That's why they're being singled out. Now, if you want to argue that the people who gave them the Oscar gave it to them because they were singled out for being Israeli, that's its own conversation. We're talking about Hassan here. Hassan only had them on because they won an Oscar for this film, for this documentary. Or they were nominated, I guess, at the time of him having them on, right? I think the nomination there is a big reason why. This is a mainstream thing that's happening. It's not like you're the one propping them up. It's you showing who is currently, quote, being propped up. Hassan even says that exactly. He says that Oscars most likely would have been ignored if the film wasn't an Israeli director attached to it. Yeah. 100%, 1,000,000%. I mean, this is exactly the same thing as like the Will Ferrell movie about how his friend is trans now. Like trans people have talked about their experiences countless times and have tried to show that they're just people. And we've had probably how many pieces of media trying to humanize trans people. Sometimes you need the group that is in that benefits from X, Y, or Z system to be the one to tell everyone else, hey, actually, I don't know if you know this, trans people are people. And if Will Ferrell has to be the guy who gets the credit for that, that sucks. Because like trans people have tried very hard to advocate for themselves and for their causes. But I mean, like you have to take all the help you can get. I don't think it's a disingenuous take. I think he cares a lot about not ceding ground because ceding ground is bad. I think this discourse is good. I don't mind. This is like maybe my pretty lukewarm take, but I like disagreements in the left. What I don't like is shit slinging on the left. I don't like when it's just dunks. It's just, hey, here's this leftist. He's a terrorist sympathizer. Like that's fucking pathetic. That's pathetic. When it's, I think BadEmpanada genuinely believes what he's saying. I just don't think I agree with it in principle. I think, or like in practice, I think it's sad, but only an Israeli would have won that Oscar. I think if you had the same exact documentary, but even better by a Palestinian, it wouldn't have won. Or wouldn't have even been nominated. And I think you can criticize that system, but like practically, I think you have to accept that that will get more people on your side. Is that the problem he's pointing to? Well, he's doing it by criticizing Hassan. I mean, it's how Hassan Piker helps liberal Zionism. Again, though, I think it's healthy to have discourse as long as the discourse isn't like clearly bullshit. I mean, that's why the content nuke was pathetic from Ethan Klein. The content nuke was literally just, this guy's a terrorist. Look, he's a terrorist. And then showed a bunch of clips of like him not being a terrorist. So like, I like healthy discourse. I think this is healthy discourse. I think he's saying to not have anti-Zionist Jewish people front and center. I think he's just saying that like we should give as much credit as we can to the Palestinians, not the people who happen to overcome their brainwashing, right? What does this mean? All the discourse is also filtered through YouTube and Twitch's business model? What does this mean? Huh?
Makes them special and
What, the
worthy of this sort of
Korban?
specific praise, as if for one, they are at all indicative of Israelis in general, they are not, and for two, as if they're even worth mentioning when there are millions of Palestinians doing way more than they are,
So why even bring them up, aside from Jewish exceptionalism, aside from like this sort of
I mean, they're nominated for an Oscar. That's free content. Even in the most like shallow way, like you have to recognize that.
little attempt to frame Israelis as potential allies and lead people away from the real way to fight the problem here, which is, sadly, as much as it might pain you to admit,
For
fighting
real estate,
against
yeah.
the Israelis, not appealing to them as potential allies, not reasoned argument to bring them to our side. If you don't think that's how you fight Nazis, then that's not how you fight Zionists. I'm sorry. It's the same thing. I'm not sorry, actually. You shouldn't need to be apologized to all the time.
Well, that's the key word there, right? You shouldn't need to. You shouldn't need to bring on Germans to explain why holocausting Jewish people is bad. You should be able to have Jewish people say, hey, this is bad, and that should, again, the key word there is should, be good enough. In practice, the people in the weaker positions, either by numbers or by wealth or by weapons or whichever, end up, not all the time, but they end up needing support, right? No, chatter, no. You don't have to. You're hyper-focusing on semantics right now. This whole video is about semantics. Like, that's what the video's about, dog.
When you're having shit said to you frankly like this.
Question I have, I guess, is there are obviously Jewish Israelis.
He brought this up himself.
I disagree with people calling it ideological purity. I think it's more than that. I think it's like a discussion on which strategies are best and most fair.
He brought this up. No one else was talking about this.
Who put their bodies on the line as well. Do you feel like that is given the ethno-supremacist values that Zionists have, or given the ethno-supremacist values that Israel has, do you feel like when there are Jewish activists side by side with you that there is less harm in general?
Well, they sometimes been attacked and arrested a lot of times, but we are the like they don't face what we face as the Palestinians in most of the cases, because in the end of the day they have the privilege because they are Israelis. They're like, some of them are our friends, and we talk every day and we work together and go to the field. But still, they're Israelis. They know that they have the privilege.
I'm not missing the point. Chatter, calm down. Okay, I'm not missing the point. He said you shouldn't have to mean to. Sorry, excuse me. You shouldn't have to mean you don't have to. You're missing the point. No, I'm disagreeing. I'm saying I know that he says you shouldn't have to, and also thinks you don't have to and you shouldn't. That he means all of those things. I'm saying in disagreement, I think you should. I think it is more effective to engage in that behavior.
And not necessarily, no. They, like in a lot of cases, there was Israeli activists, and still the harm would be the same. For example, in Beta, where American activists were shot in the head and killed, and there was other American activists, American activists, the Turkish American and Israeli activists who were like side by side with her and Palestinians, and still the same in Masafer Yatta, almost all. Sometimes it would make the harm less, depends on the situation, but sometimes, like most of the times, no.
So I mean, the guy basically shuts him down completely there in his attempt to insert the importance of the token Israelis into the conversation. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it's even worse than him specifically bringing up Yuval. And it's weird, by the way, that he specifically brought up Yuval Abraham, because Yuval Abraham isn't actually here. None of these three guys are him. So like Hassan specifically wanted to bring up like the Israeli like co-director here. It's just weird, right? Weird, wild. Ugh. And I think this part specifically also sort of illustrates a wider point that I'm making here, in that these guys clearly...
I see a lot of BadEmpanada fans that keep trying to explain the video. We're watching the same video. I'm disagreeing. It sounds like you're prioritizing Israeli voices then. You don't get liberated by allies is the thing, though. That's not true. Malcolm X said something like, the white man will give you tokens to make you think your plight has been solved without actually giving you material improvements. Do you not think this is on the same lines? In the Nazi example you used, do you not think that has the potential to lead to Nazi apologia? I have explicitly said only 500 times that I think this discourse is good because I think someone else needs to be there to be the more extreme, radical, big quotes here, voice to make sure that we don't concede too much ground, to make sure that we are held accountable for conceding too much ground. But I also think that you need both. You need people on the ground actually protesting, actually fighting, and most of the blood that's going to be spilled is going to be from the people who are of the minority group, but you also need the support of the non-minority group. That I give credit, for example, with queer folks obtaining any rights at all in this country. The only reason queer people have any rights in our country is because their blood was spilled in this country. That is the only reason. Or rather, the primary reason. That without that, we would not have queer rights. They also had to obtain allies that would be down for the cause to help, like, quote, again, big word, big quotes here, liberate them. And I give more credit to the people who actually fight the fight than the people who are like, you're right. You are disenfranchised. I think we just disagree on this. I mean, you were accusing me of basically not understanding what his point is 2 seconds ago. I understand what his point is, and I think it's good to have someone on the left that holds other people on the left accountable in a reasonable, respectful way. I just think that his perspective seems to be, I mean, even according to these chatters who are like, I guess, BadEmpanada whisperers, say, you don't have to do this. You don't have to give Israelis a voice to do this. And I'm arguing, no, I think you have to. I think it is a more effective strategy. I think you will obtain what you want faster by doing it. I understand what his position is. I think there's credit to his position, and I get his position, and I think it's very easy to hold that position, and I want to hold that position, but I don't think it is the most effective way to obtain what you want. But I also, like, I don't think that this is like, maybe I've just been in the trenches for a long time. This doesn't feel like leftist infighting. This feels more like good discourse to have. Because I've seen the leftist infighting. It's bad. It's bad. This feels like good, healthy discourse. Can you explain why you disagree? The basics of why I disagree is that if you look at previous movements to help disenfranchise people or to help minorities, it has generally been made easier by having allies and propping allies up. Although it should not be the case that, like, that should happen. Historically, not always, to be very clear, not always. Historically, I think it's been pretty effective. But I mean, I don't think the video is bad necessarily. I get all the points he's making, and I think it's good to have someone that makes these points. But like, yeah. Allies in those cases will then go on to use their privilege and platform to boost the oppressed voices as cooperative, yeah. And then we can look back on it later and be like, man, isn't it sad that, like, we had to utilize these voices instead of just giving these people the rights that they deserve? Isn't that sad and pathetic? I was actually excited for the discourse, got a little disappointed at how many people were not clearly engaging with BadEmpanada's points. Well, I think they just didn't understand what his points are. And I think that there have been so many bad faith criticisms of Hassan at this point that I think people are a little bit on the defensive, which is fair. And this is like a very, this is a very niche specific conversation about a very niche specific disagreement. It's just an important conversation to have. Is more discussion on theory? Yes, precisely. But I think it's good. I'm all for this. Listen, as long as the criticism isn't just bad faith garbage of like, here's a clip that's only 2 seconds long. I wonder what Hassan said before and after the 2 seconds. As long as it's not that, because for the love of God, dude, it's just so lazy when it's just clips. When it's just the total fucking sloppy clip chimps. I'm so boring. This is actually like pretty interesting to engage with. It's not just a Hassan bad video like most of them are. Yeah. This is really a conversation about how to organize. Yeah. I mean, I don't think some people are saying that they think that it's bad faith because Hassan gives voices to Palestinians also all the time. But I think BadEmpanada's disagreements are about the comments that they were engaging in YouTube or on YouTube or whatever. Issue I've seen in the people in comments of the video seem to be missing the whole point. Firmly believed that there's no such thing as someone who meets people where they're at and helps de-radicalize them. Yeah. And yeah, if someone else is bringing it up also like in group, out group on, I mean, again, I see the positions and I also recognize the frustration. I mean, what he's trying to do is like, for anyone who still doesn't understand, imagine being Palestinian, imagine being in Gaza. And the only way that people listen to your plight is if you bring a fucking anti-Zionist Israeli on. That your calls for an end to this apartheid state weren't good enough. That someone of the privileged group had to tell everyone for them to believe it. Like, that is a shit position to be in. And we should be able, and we can, get liberation without having to do that. I just think it's faster if you do it. And as long as the means aren't cruel, if it obtains the ends faster, I'm for it. And I think that like the means here would be offensive, right? Highlighting Israeli voices. I think it's very offensive to the Palestinian people. But I also think that you will be able to de-radicalize more people more quickly. Please provide historical examples for that. I mean, just like literally look at queer rights in America, or look at women's rights in America, or look at black rights in America. Yes, I already conceded, not really conceded, but I already agree with you that before you type any more, was Jim Crow ended because white people felt bad and it was organizing outside the system that produced the pressure? Yes, you produce the pressure, you make people informed, the people that are suffering do all of the work. But if you can manage to get enough people on the other side convinced, when you prop those voices up, you can make more progress. Like Abe Lincoln didn't give a fuck about slavery. He didn't give a shit about it. You think he didn't give a fuck, dude?
Gain political power. Even if you're not always on the same page on all issues, it is important to build power where you do agree.
And it shouldn't have been the case that, like, any type of liberation needed the white man to have it get done. But it is factually true that having more people on your side and having people on your side that can relate or in-group with other people. So, like, in this case, the white man is going to have a better job convincing the other white men, actually, these people deserve rights. Because he's not biased, which is a fucking stupid, insane concept to begin with. But it is effective. And I want people to stop suffering as soon as possible. And from my perspective, from where I'm standing, looking at all these previous struggles that people have had, it's effective to get as many people as you can on your side. There should be like a limit, right? Obviously, but and we shouldn't just accept anyone, obviously, again. That's the point that I'm making. Dominant group isn't going to change if their in-group doesn't change their mind. I'm sure Palestinians would appreciate an end to the apartheid no matter where it came from. Advocacy praising can happen after. That's just reality. People need to read Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit. She explains this conversation perfectly. But anyways, yeah, I can see how people think BadEmpanada sounds nitpicky. However, I mean, I think I think it's good for discourse. I think we're kind of just like going in circles now. I think I've already made my point enough times. I just think that like it's good to have the discourse in the first place because it's good to have people check you. And also I think it's good to have someone making sure we didn't cross the line too far. That we don't just accept anyone and everyone and uplift just anyone and everyone. But anywho, guys, all right. I think that's enough of that discourse. I think that's enough. I can see why people were frustrated by both sides of this. I can get that. And to be clear, I hope he makes more videos on this stuff. Like, I think it's good.
You make the world a better place. Medium dark skin tone emoji modifier.
Medium dark skin emoji modifier.